Good evening. Clock hour has arrived to our council meeting this evening, 23rd of January of 2004. We welcome you and appreciate you joining us tonight. We'll get right into our agenda tonight. Pastor Lewis has joined us, which we're very appreciative. And Ryan, thank you for arranging that, Councilmember Barker. So Pastor Lewis, if you'd like to come up at this point in time and you can give us an invocation, a thought, or both, and then lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, thank you for having me here. My name is Louis Franco, and I pastor at Northview Church, presently in Far West, although we are moving right on 2700 North, so we'll be right here. But thankful to be here tonight, and thank you for inviting me. Join me in prayer if you would like to. Father in heaven, we just thank you. We thank you for being with us. We thank you for the beautiful place that we have to live in and raise our families. God, and I thank you, Lord, for leaders, city leaders who are able, Lord God, to put their differences aside for the better good. And God, I just pray that you would give them guidance and direction in all of the decisions that they have to make. And even in disagreement, may there be unity. And I just pray, God, that you would be with all the families that make up this wonderful community. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Just a word, and I won't worry, I'm not going to preach here tonight. But, you know, 3 times in his presidency, Abraham Lincoln called for a national day of fasting and prayer through official proclamations. The first was in 1861, and he called for fasting and prayer for the unity of the nation. The second time he issued a proclamation was in 1863, and he called on the nation to pray a prayer of humility over the nation. The third time, in 1864, he called the leaders of the nation for fasting and prayer. And as we look at our history, there are so many things that have made this nation what it is, such a great place to be. And we have the incredible privilege of living in one of the greatest, or I like to say the greatest state in the nation. North Ogden just happens to be one of the most beautiful cities in all of Utah. And it's not just because it's natural beauty, but it's because of the family values that make this city what it is, such a beautiful community. And just recently, In-N-Out decided to close the very first store that they've ever had to close in Oakland, California. And the reason that they decided to close this store is because the crime in the area is so rampant that it's become unsafe for even their own employees. My fear is that if we forget the principles that made us what we are today, that we will find ourselves someday in a place in a country that we don't recognize. And so I thank you all for doing the job that you do to keep us safe and to make this place the place that it is to raise our children. So thank you. I'd like to go ahead and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much, Pastor Lewis. Those are very meaningful comments. And I think as our governor has said now, let's disagree if we do, respect for each other and with the best things in life. So, and thank you for that prayer, very much so. All right, we will now continue on in our agenda. We'll go to the consent agenda. But before we get there, I just want to express our order of voting tonight. We'll start here with Councilmember Dalpaz, and then we'll just work our way down tonight. So that's how we'll start on any votes need to be taken tonight. Council, do you have anything in regards to potential conflicts of interest that you'd like to disclose at this point in time based upon our agenda items? Okay, I see none. We'll move on to item number 2. I had the opportunity to sit in with the Planning Commission committee. We had very qualified individuals apply to serve on the Planning Commission this year. And after those interviews, the committee has recommended to me, and I accept the recommendation, that we appoint Chad Bailey to be a planning commissioner and serve a term here on our planning commission in North Ogden. So council, I wanted to bring that to your attention, and we look for a motion to approve that recommended appointment from the interview committee. Could I get a motion?
Mayor, I move that we approve Chad Bailey to serve on the planning commission in North Ogden.
Thank you, Councilmember Severing. Do we have a second? Second. Thank you, Councilmember Pulver. Any questions or comments in regards to that? All right, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion passes to appoint Mr. Chad Bailey to the planning commission. Do I need to do a roll call vote on that actually, John?
No, it
Okay.
does, it's not required.
All right. I'll now have public comments. And, just as a reminder, I believe, I haven't looked at the back of the agenda, but it's 5 minutes. Yes, good. Our public comments tonight. If you would step up to the podium if you'd like to make a comment. Please state your name, and if you're a resident of North Ogden, and once again, please save the mayor some grace by limiting your comments to no more than 5 minutes. Okay?
Bill Swanson, North Ogden resident. I'll be very brief. For item number 6 tonight, I think there are several comments that were made by the administrative hearing officer during the variance hearing that was held that are pertinent to tonight's decision. First, the applicant built an accessory structure on the property without obtaining a building permit for the structure that houses a workshop and a garage. And then the findings, that first there was a hearing held, second, the applicant, I think number 2 is most informing on the decision that the hearing officer made. The applicant created a self-imposed hardship by constructing an accessory building without a building permit. And then number 3, there are no physical constraints on the property that would have prohibited the applicant from construction in compliance with North Ogden City codes. Just a reminder that your job is not to provide favors and to rescue people from circumstances that they put themselves into. This is self-created. If the individual had gotten a building permit as they knew that they should at the very beginning, then there wouldn't be a problem. In the planning commission hearing that was held in November, I believe, the applicant admitted that if he had done things correctly, then there wouldn't be this problem. I would urge council not to change an ordinance citywide, changing how things are done citywide just because an individual doesn't follow the ordinances. Thank you.
Do we have anyone online this evening who would like to comment?
No raised hands at this point.
Anyone else here in the audience that would like to step up to the podium and comment this evening? This is a reminder, we do have public comments at the end of our meeting also. All right, I don't see any further comments. We'll move on to item number 4. Hopefully our auditor is online. Last time we had a few technical difficulties and he was unable to join us. So he will be joining us tonight. Jamie, did you have anything you wanted to comment for initially before we get started?
No, I started just gonna let Ron go first and then.
Okay. Ron, if you would like to then proceed.
Okay, can you all hear me
Comments
okay?
you have or discussion with the council.
Great. Can you hear me?
We're gonna turn up the volume a little bit here.
There we go, Ron.
Okay, hopefully you can all hear me. I apologize for what happened in the audit committee meeting and I wasn't able to attend, but thank you for being flexible and allowing me to be part of your meeting tonight. Again, my name is Ron Stewart, partner with Gilbert and Stewart CPAs in Provo. Grateful to be part of your city and construct and perform the audit this year for 2023. What I'd like to do is just spend a couple of minutes with you and tell you what we do as auditors, the conclusions that we came to, and how we came to those conclusions. So there's really three areas of a city that we look at when we come in to do a financial audit. One is to make sure the financial statements are materially correct, that they meet accounting standards, and that you can rely upon those numbers. The second is to ensure that internal controls are designed, that they're implemented, and that they're effective. And the third is that we're in compliance with state law based on the areas that we looked at during this fiscal year. So those are that's our job when we come in to do an audit, is to ensure those three things. As we look at the financial statements themselves, we take a look at the trial balance of the city, and then we perform a number of tests on those balances to make sure that they're materially correct. We send out confirmations. So we'll send out a confirmation to a third party to make sure that the balances that they show match what ours show. We'll send those for cash, investments, property taxes, long-term debt, taxes and other revenues from other governments, URS pension obligations, and other various balances that we see that we need to confirm. Throughout the audit, we'll pull a number of invoices and review those. At the beginning of the audit, we pull a sample just to make sure that the check matches the invoice, that it ties to the general ledger, that it's posted the proper period and proper accounts. That also gives us a good look at internal controls to make sure those are working and properly and effective. As we're testing balances, we also pull invoices as well for capital assets, accrued liabilities, and various other expenses that we come across as we're looking and doing our testing. We also pull a number of invoices that happen after the end of the year. We want to make sure that the expenses are posted to the proper period. So if an expense happened in June, we want to make sure it's posted in June, excuse me, even though the check wasn't written until July. We also do a number of recalculations. So there's a number of calculations on a financial statement, and we go back and review those. Some of those calculations are regarding accrued payroll, depreciation expense, compensated absences, accrued interest, pension allocations. And so we'll go back and we'll mathematically recalculate those balances to make sure they're correct and that they meet accounting standards. And then also we do a number of analytical reviews. We'll create expectations, and then we'll compare balances to this year, to the prior year, to the year before, to make sure that we can understand why those differences occur. If the change is different than what we expected it to be, then we start to ask questions and perform tests to make sure that we can understand where those balances are coming from and why the changes happened. We do that at the beginning of the audit. We do that as we're actually testing balances as well. And then we do that again at the end of the audit as the financial statements are written and we're reviewing those. So at the beginning, we want to make sure we can find those differences and perform tests to understand those. We go in a little bit more detail as we're doing the individual testing balances. And then at the end, we want to make sure that we've addressed all the changes that we've found as we're reviewing the financial statements. And we do those tests and a significant number of other tests to ensure that those financial statements are materially correct. So if you look at the audit package, in that package, there's an independent auditor's report. The second paragraph says, in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects, the respective financial position of the governmental activities, business type activities, each major fund and the aggregate remaining fund information of the city, as of June 30th, 2023, and the respective changes in financial position and cash flows were applicable thereof for the year ended in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. That is an unmodified opinion. That's a clean opinion, or the best opinion that you can receive. So what that means is that we feel that the financial statement you have in front of you, the numbers are materially correct. They meet accounting standards, and you can rely that that's what really happened within your city during the year. The second thing that we look at as far as internal controls, we want to make sure that those controls are designed, that they're implemented, and they're working effectively. We don't necessarily give an opinion on internal controls, but we do review those as part of our audit to make sure that they're meeting those three criteria. We do that through interviews, questionnaires, walkthroughs, and observations. So we'll take an invoice and we'll walk it from the point of purchase all the way through to the financial statements and see that those controls are being met as they go through. We do that for cash receipts, cash disbursements, and payroll generally are the things that we look at to make sure that we can trace those through and that those controls are being followed. And then as we're doing testing in other areas, we look at those controls as well as we're testing those areas too to make sure that those are meeting those criteria. If there's a portion of your city that didn't have controls, or those controls were just not effective at all, that's considered a material weakness. If the controls were effective at one time and they were designed and they're implemented, but they're just not working now as effectively as they could be, we would consider that a significant deficiency. Both of those we would bring to your attention and let you know that, hey, there's a portion of your city we probably need to tighten those controls. Through our interviews, walkthroughs, and observations, we didn't note anything that came to those levels. So we feel like the internal controls that you have within your city are designed, that they're implemented, and that they're working. And there's no issues that we need to bring before you to let you know. The third thing that we do is to look at state compliance. The state auditor has set certain areas within the city that he has required us to, on an annual or every 3-year basis, look at each one of those areas. For this year, we looked at budgetary compliance, fund balance, fraud risk assessment, justice court, restricted taxes, government fees, and Open and Public Meetings Act. So with each one of those areas, they give us prescribed forms and procedures to perform. We looked through those procedures. We did what that was required, and we found that your city is in compliance with state law. So there's no areas that you're out of compliance in those areas that we looked at. So as far as what we looked at, you guys are in compliance and doing well. So that's kind of a really quick review of what we do as auditors and our conclusions. Jamie and her staff do a great job. An audit is very in-depth. We throw a lot of information. We ask for a lot of documentation, and they do a great job of providing that to us. So I just wanted to let her know we're grateful for her work and how well she does. But that is what I had to present tonight. If there's any questions or if I can dig into anything else, I'd be more than happy to.
Thank you for that report. Let me ask the council if they have any questions. Councilmember Pulver?
Yeah, I guess the one question I had, and I think it's been the one question you've been asking for a while, is the pension stuff. And I guess the URS provides data, and I know that's kind of basically something that you take and just report. I guess the one thing I just want to make sure is that, in reading it, it says a lot of employer does this and employer does that, but as you note in some of the pages that it's deferred outflow resources, so it's not something that is currently something we have to worry about. But I just wanted to make sure that that's a correct statement or a correct assumption on my part, is that that's not something the city needs to worry about at present.
Correct. Yeah, a lot of those, as far as the net pension liability and net pension asset, you can notice that those will switch. And if you notice from last year to this year, there's a pretty significant change from an asset to a liability, which mostly depends upon the market and how well those securities are performing. So no, there isn't anything that the city has to necessarily worry about, but to monitor. I mean, basically, if everything were to shut down and the system were to fail, we might have some liability, but URS and the way that it's performing, that's very, 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 very unlikely.
Well, I'd like like to expand on Councilmember Polder's comment. Generally, I'm used to seeing in a rising interest rate environment that the liability actually decreases. I was quite surprised to see it go from an asset to a liability. Because there are certain assumptions that are used. I guess I'm interested to know what assumptions changed. Was that the return assumption that changed dramatically? Because generally in a rising interest rate environment, the funding liability would decrease. So I'm just wondering what other components cause that, if it's the service costs or, and I don't want to put you on the spot because it's a very complicated thing.
Yeah, I'd have to dig into it a little bit deeper, but yeah, at this point, I probably couldn't answer that in an intelligent way right now.
Maybe if you get a chance, you could get back to us, because
Yep.
That looked a little bit odd. So.
Yep, I will definitely shoot back an email with that information for you.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Jamie, did you have anything you wanted to add, or any other questions for Ron, council? I guess the question that I have is, does the council need to approve this to submit to the state, or just the
No, it's just a
document I
report.
signed is adequate?
Yeah, it's just a report that's required, so no action or decision. So, there's no other questions for Ron. I want to go ahead and let him go if he's inclined.
Okay, thank you so much for your time.
All right, thanks, Ron. Appreciate it. I just want to point out just two things from the audit report. This report is available on our website. So if you need some interesting material, go ahead. Just on, I believe it's page 4 on the audit report. I just want to point out the total net position increased for the city. We increased, actually my glasses, 11.4 million. Basically what net position means is just that the city is able to meet ongoing obligations to its citizens and the creditors. And then the other thing I want to point out is we did increase fund balance from around 23% to 31%, or 3.5 million. So how general fund balance works is that we have a floor and a ceiling, and we reviewed this in our last meeting. Our floor is 5% and our ceiling is 35%. And like I just mentioned, we are at 31%, and that is based on the current period revenues. And so at June 30, 31% was for June 30 revenues. And so that percentage goes up a little bit higher because our budget is actually different than it was in 2023. So the council will have a decision to make. We'll have a budget amendment sometime this year. We will have to reduce that fund balance based on how current revenues come in, and or if council wants to reduce it to the 20 or 25% like we discussed before. And also keep in mind that the 5-year plan did include the $775,000 transfer, reducing that fund balance. So those are just kind of some things I wanted to point out.
If I could just add to that, state law is 5 to 35, right? We
5 to
have an
35.
internal threshold for our rainy day fund, which is basically what fund balance is in layman's terms, of 15%.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also like to expand when you say our net position increased 11 million. The major portion of that was contribution of assets from developers, roads, pipes. It's not like we accumulated
Correct, right.
all this money. It grew primarily from the contribution of development assets. As the major contributor. I always like to point that out because
Yeah.
I don't want people to think we got a lot of money just hanging around.
No.
Jamie, thanks for your good work on the audit. I
Appreciate your
know,
support.
having been on both sides of that, it's ends up in a piece of paper that people look at and say, oh, nice.
Right,
But it's
Yeah.
extremely large amount of work.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your efforts there and keeping us on track.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. We're out to item number 5, council, which is a discussion or action to consider an ordinance amendment, amending ordinance in City Code Title 7-3-4. It's the winter parking issue that we discussed last council meeting. Basically, as I understand this, John, before us, we have got items to approve or disapprove or amend the ordinance as presented in our packet here that you have our books. So it would seem like the best way to proceed, John, unless you tell me different, is to seek a motion to approve the ordinance as included in the packet, and see if there's adequate support for a motion. I have a second, and then we would entertain discussion. And during that discussion, if the council has questions or suggested amendments, that would be the time to do that. And then a vote would be taken subsequent to that.
That works really well. Yep.
Thank you, John. That's very nice of you. Okay, so before us, council, you have in your packet amendments to the current ordinance. And this would be city title code that I referenced. And this would be ordinance 20-24-01, I believe. Is that the correct number?
Yes.
Right, as a quarter. To amend the motion as presented in your packet. So at this point in time, I would seek a motion regarding that ordinance amendment. Do we have a motion?
Mayor,
Councilmember Severing,
I move that we approve ordinance 2024-1, amending city code title 7-3-4, updating winter commercial parking restrictions.
do we have a second?
Second.
Have a second from Councilmember Barker. I will now entertain discussion regarding the proposed ordinance amendment. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Barker.
I had one thought, well, several thoughts, but one thought I wanted to bring up right now that I am concerned with the property in question here has currently an empty lot across the street, but that will not always remain so. And I'm sure once that property is developed, there will, you know, not always, it won't always be easy who parks on that curb on that side of the road. But especially during the snow and when the plows are trying to clear. So I just had the thought of, and I realize it makes it more complicated maybe for those who are implementing it, but you know, if it said something like on the side of the road, or on Washington, maybe then it wouldn't interfere with the property across from it. But on the other hand, if we were to put in an ordinance something like this, then the property across from it would also have the authority or ability to follow the same ordinance, which would mean they could park their employees' vehicles on their side of the road, meaning both sides are packed and it's a safety issue again. So I don't know that makes a difference, but those were just a couple of my thoughts.
I think your comment about safety is important. I believe parking takes place basically on both sides of the road
Currently.
now. And as we discussed this, I would just remind you, council, that staff has to enforce these ordinances. So it has to be kind of something that's can be enforced, else there's no use having an ordinance. So whatever you decide, I always like to make sure I have conversation with those who have to enforce this. So I talked to Dave and I talked to the chief about in regards to this. But Anyway, any other comments at this point? Then Councilmember Pulver.
Just a couple of thoughts on this. I've gone back and forth on this. The main intent of the ordinance is to make sure that the plows will clear the roads in a safe manner such that, you know, if someone leaves a car on the rich street, then it's, you know, and then they have to dig out and there's a big pile of snow there, which is usually not removed. So I guess the big point there is that, in the current instance, what we're talking about is that usually, well, there has never been an incident where the snow has to be removed at that location. I think in the big picture here, what we're talking about is making sure that everybody understands that for commercially zoned business, this is what it applies to. And I think for the most part, we're talking about daylight hours. So I think that's the key thing. And then the other thing is that as we looked into the UDOT situation, city rules apply. So that's what that kind of fixed that part of it anyways. And so my opinion is, I think if we do something, this would be the best words. There is always the option of not to do anything. And let the intent and code enforcement rule the world. So
Just a clarification, so you said something about Washington Boulevard, are you indicating, I understand right now, and John clarified this, I think. Right now, there is no prohibition by UDOT to park on Washington Boulevard,
I
but
talked-
the city ordinance can, John, I might need your words on this, but the city can have an ordinance that prohibits that, which you believe we currently do. Jack?
The current rule is no parking on a public street, including UDOT roads during the day. And a snowstorm, during active snowstorm.
And I confirmed that with UDOT, Region 1 director, whatever, but he called me back, Scott, said that they've tried to figure out their own rules and city usually wins, so.
City kind of. And I think it's important that, you know, whatever the council decides, it's related on a commercial zone. Because as you'll recall, we had a gentleman whose business is driving a truck, right? And he asked if he could park his truck in front of his business, which is his home. I don't, you know, that would obviously create some substantial issues. So is there any other comments? Do we want to proceed with this? Anyone want to propose an amended motion? Or do we proceed with this? If you want to proceed, Councilmember Barker.
I'll just make one comment. The reason I seconded this is, as we've heard from Big O, they've been doing this for 23 years with no problem, and they said whenever there's a snowstorm, they move their vehicles. I don't have anything to believe they won't keep doing it, and I mean, this would be open it up for other commercial businesses, but where it's never been an issue, and now all of a sudden it is. I think this wording works great.
Okay. All right, and Councilmember Watson.
Sorry to speak again. I am wondering whether or not this passes on either direction. Is there an ordinance that states how far away vehicles can be parked from a stop sign? And does anyone know what that number is?
That's a state, isn't it, John?
It's 30 feet from a stop sign.
Because I feel like if that were strongly followed, then that would help a lot on the safety.
Yeah, just to pass on, I think somebody made the comment. I think, Chief, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the purpose is, from their standpoint, is to make sure we have good traffic flow. Safe traffic flow on our streets is the reason that the ordinance is in place, and the reason that we want to make sure we plow the streets so that we have safe, is that the right term, safe flow of traffic?
The traffic can flow freely and safely.
Yeah, freely. I left that word out. Thank you. Okay. We have a motion in front of us. If there's no amendments, then I would proceed with the vote if no one wants to amend. Okay. All right. This is a roll call vote since it's an amendment to an ordinance. Councilmember Dalpaz. No. Councilmember Barker.
Yes.
Councilmember Watson,
No,
Councilmember Pulver,
Yes.
Councilmember Sedley.
Yes.
Motion passes on a 3-2 vote. That becomes effective immediately, I believe, John?
Yep.
So we'll proceed to item number 6. This is a discussion or action to consider legislative amendment regarding accessory building standards citywide. Mr. Hess, I believe you're going to lead this discussion.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We have before you a request from a citizen, Bob Wallace, who's here in attendance with us today, to amend an ordinance in Title 11 regarding the accessory building standards. Staff report was lengthy. It had a number of items and pieces of information from this case that's kind of gone on. So the applicant has constructed a building without a building permit. We put a stop work order in on that. They applied for a variance. In this case, variance law for land use law is really specific on what constitutes a variance. The administrative hearing officer found the item was not, excuse me, eligible for a variance. And the applicant, in trying to do their full due diligence and get through all of their process that they can do, has now applied for a zoning text amendment with their own application and money. So this wasn't a staff-led or a city-led application. The planning commission, they really had a robust conversation about this. It was a little bit difficult in the minutes and recording the meeting because there was a bunch that was done at the whiteboard, but essentially staff has drawn this up for you to give you what the planning commission's recommendation is. John, do we have the? So my not to scale drawing that I prepared today for us. The current ordinance for accessory building standards states that beginning at 3 feet from the property line, a structure may be 10 feet tall. So nothing can be built within 3 feet of a property line in North Ogden at all. Between 3 and 5 feet away from a property line, that structure can be 10 feet tall. This is designed for tough sheds or small accessory buildings, that sort of thing. Beginning at 5 feet away from the property line, building heights march at a 1-to-1 ratio up to a maximum height of 25 feet tall at 20 feet away from the property line. And then there's a handful of other considerations here. There's a minimum separation between a main building of 6 feet. But the way you can think of our current ordinance and the way it's administered is it's a total building height and setback ordinance. So we don't care whether your roof actually touches the maximum height at the point that the setback is, or if the eave of the building or the roof line of the building is a gable roof or gable end or something. We just take maximum height and that tells us what the setback is. And I keep a cheat sheet so I can tell you at whatever point when a property owner calls and says, how tall can my building be? And we'll say, well, if your building is 20 feet tall, it's 15 feet away from the property line. We can indicate that pretty easily. The Planning Commission's recommendation in trying to find a way to kind of create a cure for this particular issue, and the applicant, just to let you know, in the application, they were looking for a way to isolate this issue. So we talked about rezoning neighboring properties or having property that could never be zoned residential when it's neighboring a property owner, allow a reduced setback. And the Planning Commission just couldn't find a way to isolate this particular case or think of a reasonable way to, through that sort of effort, do this. So this would be citywide. This would be everywhere that's accessory building standards are acceptable. And the ordinance as written would cover all residential zones, all the hillside protection zones, and residential R2, 3, and 4. So anywhere accessory building standards are. And what it's gone to is what I'd call a vertical building box. So the 3 foot and 5 foot at 10 feet tall still stands, and the maximum height of 25 feet tall at 20 feet away still stands. But essentially everything underneath this curve can be building. So the building, if you have a roof line that you can turn and nest under that curve, you can push the building closer to the property line. So that's this lower drawing that I've shown, indicating down here, if you draw, goes this line down, the building can slide over however many feet it can until the wall height touches that curve. So this becomes a wall height ordinance. not a maximum height ordinance. Planning Commission said, technically, you could, it's effectively the same amount of visual impact if you're standing at your property line, because somebody could build a building this tall at any point in the curve. It's just the roof line that'll be marching away from you. But in this case, that's the change. So it's wall height versus total height. We've talked to building department, Ryan, our other planner. So everyone who reviews building permits, we understand how this would be administered now. We think that the text language, while it's a simple change, it would be easy enough to administer. And so it's really up to council at this point to determine whether this is in the best interest of the city. I'm happy to answer any questions, and we also have the applicant here.
Any questions, council? Councilmember Bowler?
And so, because they had talked about, during the discussion about vertical height, meaning on the side of a hill. And to me, that makes more sense, because if you have a retaining wall behind you and you build a 10-foot structure or something a little bit higher, and somebody's retaining wall is 11 feet, the intent of what we're talking about here is visual obstruction of somebody else's view or whatever. So this doesn't negate that ordinance. So I think to me, and this is something that's going to help eventually anyways when you're going up the hill as well.
Yeah, it's hard to write ordinances that take into account your neighbor's property. We try not to do like a chicken and egg type of ordinance where it's related to somebody else's, because technically, I guess somebody could build a retaining wall on their property and build their site up, and then it's less visual impact, but we don't really deal with the grades. In this case, what would happen on a cross grade, and this is actually the case of this building, is there's a pretty significant cross grade here, and building official and myself went out and we estimated this building's total height to be from the peak of the roof line down to about halfway down this retaining wall. So it's actually, we've taken a grade from this point and averaged the grade across the site and given the applicant an average grade on the building height. Every single piece of property is different, and technically by max height from here to here, this building exceeds 25 feet tall, or it's really, really close, but this gives them 19 and a half feet, or it's a little bit different what the max height is. Questions?
Councilmember Valpas?
Just a comment, I'm worried about changing the ordinance to kind of fit this particular situation. And the reason that I'm worried about changing it, the ordinance as a whole, is the ADU ordinance has gone back and forth for the last 5 or so years. And so anyone that's been coming to planning commission and city council, you've seen it kind of yo-yo back and forth. And I believe that there could be an unintended consequence somewhere else in the city. I don't know exactly what that will be, but it almost always happens where an unintended consequence will come up. We'll get a resident to come to the city and say, hey, why did you change this to allow this? And we say, oh, well, we had to fix a problem for someone. We needed to help them out. And then so it wasn't for the greater good. So that's my only comment.
But I have a question. Have we historically used the average height based upon that slope?
Yeah,
So we haven't turned anyone down based upon the fact not using that calculation.
No, we do. Between the building department and the planning department, we'll go back and forth on these. And we're a city we've got significant number of structures on the hillside. We do this for single family homes. We have an uphill and a downhill ordinance for how you do that 35 feet tall. So yeah, we have applied the same rationale to a single family home to our accessory buildings, just in some cases to just physically let somebody build an exterior outbuilding. So yeah.
It's usually from the front curve.
Yeah, and we typically measure, we measure at the front, like the threshold, essentially, like where are you going to enter this building? Because we have some lots that might be cross sloped this direction or like front to back. And we pick a point in the building and say, this is where we're going to measure your height, because it's going to be taller and shorter on each side.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Barker?
At first, I was actually kind of opposed because I didn't quite understand, but looking at this, And as someone that's been working construction for 20-something years, the option you've mentioned, it actually makes a lot more sense. For anyone that builds in construction, I can visualize that a lot better than the top one. And when it's all going off its line of sight, it doesn't matter if your building's right next to it, as long as you're within that frame, you're not gonna affect anything.
Councilmember Watson.
Two questions. First of all, is the proposed option more work for anyone significant? Okay, and the second question is, if it weren't for the particular applicant, the new proposed option would be more feasible for most people who live on a hillside. Is that what I'm understanding?
No, the hillside really doesn't matter. In this case, it's just a matter of the total height of your building, how far away it needs to be from the property line. This will give more flexibility for people because we have gotten this request that has said, if my total building height looks like this, what if I chop my roof down and have the roof go up at a gable end? Can I push it closer? And so we have had that request come up and we just say, nope, it doesn't matter what your roof looks like, it's total height and that's your distance. So it's a way to put overall taller buildings closer to the property.
So maybe not make it more feasible for the hillside, but just more smooth and feasible for in general. Not just for
Some
this.
property owners would be able to get buildings closer to their
Okay.
property.
Thank you.
I think that was the last amendment we made. We tried to accommodate, the further away, the taller it could be.
Yeah.
And we thought we had our hands around it. I guess with time number 5. What else? Any questions for Scott? We would like to hear from the applicant and all council. Is that your comment, Councilmember Del Paz, or do you have further comment?
I'm okay to hear from the applicant, but I had one more comment.
Let's hear it.
And I just want to drive this home. Scott mentioned that a building permit was applied for and it was ignored. So you have to remember that. And I hate to say that, but it's like building permit was denied. It was even red tagged. It was said, no, don't do this. And it continued to go on. And then I also wanted to point out that they did try to do a variance through a hearing that's in your notes and in the report. So they went down that road and it didn't work out for them. So from my perspective, that's why we're here.
Okay. Would you like to hear from the applicant's counsel? You think you get any further information, or are you okay? I don't want to drag it out, but I want to make sure you have all the information you need.
I'd like to ask one question.
Go ahead, Councilman Severn.
Scott, as I went through all this material, will you tell me at what point was it red tagged?
It was found to be under construction. So the building was started without a building permit. The building was discovered at the time that the flooding happened on 1700 North that came out of Coldwater Canyon. And we requested the property owner obtain a building permit at that time. And based on the height of the building and the current setback of the foundation of the building, we were unable to issue a building permit legally. So at that point, the building was red tagged. And since that point, he's not really done a whole lot of structural anything, but to protect his asset, he's covered it in Tyvek wrap, exterior wrapped it for winter. But it was red tagged immediately. And we've done this before where you find a property owner out of compliance, you ask them to fill out a land use permit, a building permit to come into compliance, knowing that you may likely have to deny it, but that's just our pathway essentially through to deny and red tag.
Did I see anyone who wanted to hear from the applicant? I'd like to hear from the applicant. If the applicant has anything to say that would further the discussion here, help the council in making a decision. You say your name and your residence.
I'm Bob Wallace. I obviously live in North Point. First of all, when I started this, I had intentions of getting the building permit. It was right in the middle of COVID. I was trying to get contractors lined up to do this, and as you know, that was a difficult time to get anything done with construction, with respect to contractors. I had an opportunity and I should have done it, and I've already stated that I admit that I was wrong in what I did. But I thought I was doing it in compliance with what the city ordinances were. I thought by being 10 feet back from the property line that I would be within compliance. And I will admit, I didn't really consider the height of the building. I didn't know how that would be affected. I didn't do any more work once I talked to Scott and the other the inspector. Other than protecting the structure with some plastic, it's the only thing I've done. So I didn't blatantly go and try to continue doing it without a building permit. I stopped. And I've been trying to jump through all the hoops, trying to get this thing remedied. Second thing, the property that I'm adjacent to is Buena Vista Water. It's not ever going to be a residential place. It's where those 3 tanks used to be. That's right adjacent, right across the fence from me. So it'll never have a problem. And Buena Vista, by the way, and now they're happy to write a letter. They say they have absolutely no problem with the height of the structure. It doesn't affect them at all. Third thing, I tried to, if I could have bought 5 feet of their property, I'd be within compliance. They unfortunately couldn't do that because they have plans to build another water tank there. But even if I had been able to do it, nothing would have changed other than a line on a piece of paper. And everything else would be the same. And nothing would change. And so I don't think anybody or anything is being harmed by letting this continue. And from what the planning commission, when I met with them in November, they were all in agreement that this change would actually be beneficial to the city in similar situations where, didn't they talk about a civic zone or something like that?
Yeah, they went back and forth with whether to rezone, allow something like this next to properties that are zoned civic zone, where it'll be parks and institutions, city properties that would never be residential, so you don't have that same conflict. But generally, Eric Thomas, our planning commission chair, who had workshopped this idea and came prepared with a recommendation to give to the planning commission from his standpoint, felt like it would be beneficial from a construction standpoint.
And then lastly, with respect to the comments from the gentleman that made the public comments the first, nobody was doing me a favor. There was no favors talked about. I've been trying to go through whatever I can to try to remedy this, and it's been a tough battle. And you guys are the last ones to deal with, and I'm hoping for a positive outcome. But don't turn it down just because somebody is thinking they're doing me a favor, because yes, it would be advantageous to me, but nobody was, there were no favors involved. I didn't like the way that was presented. So, you have
Any questions, Mr. Go ahead, Councilmember Bolden.
Just a comment more than anything else. I agree. I've kind of looked at it as well from the property standpoint, but to me, if the intent of the original is visual, and it was just the way that it was taken. So really the current proposed one, there's no difference. The height, everything else is the same. It's just the way they take the measurement. That's the only difference. And that's what Scott explained. I sat through the whole meeting in November. So I sat through all of it and I understand. And to me, regardless of how it came to the planning commission, this is a good change. Does it benefit a citizen? Yes. But irrespective of that, I think it's a good decision anyways. Thanks, sir.
Councilmember Severin.
So on 4A of the document, literal enforcement of this title would cause an unreasonable hardship for the applicant. So let's say that the decision was not rendered in your favor, what would you need to do to make this work? We're talking about removing a foundation, we're talking about,
They'd make me take the roof off the highest peak there and drop it down a couple feet.
so as far as like the setback,
I wouldn't have to change the
Wouldn't have to
setback,
change
if I
anything
just
in the
lowered the height, the total height of the structure.
If this passes.
which just passed.
You know, I mean, it could be done at a very large expense. But I don't see how anything is gained by that other than somebody that worries about things like that would sleep better at night or something, I don't know, but yeah, that would be the only thing I could do would be to reconstruct the roof.
And you didn't have a contractor working on this, right?
No, I'm building it myself.
Okay.
I did have the foundation, that's why I say I needed a contractor, and I had a concrete contractor that gave me, there was a shot to get it in, and I thought I would be okay by being 10 feet away.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, council. You've been presented with a request by the applicant. We've heard from Mr. Scott Hess. This would be a legislative amendment. That amendment here is before you, it was also in your packet. So I will then be looking for a motion to approve the legislative amendment to amend the accessory building standards citywide. We have such a motion.
What's the number?
This is not a number, this is not an ordinance, this is an amendment to an
Amendment. A motion to accept the amendment as written.
So yeah, there should be an ordinance number.
So it'll be number 2.
It'll be ordinance number 2. Sorry, that's our fault, Mayor.
2024-02. 2024-02 as written.
second to that motion.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Barker. Any further discussions or questions at this time? All right, this will be a roll call vote. We'll start with Councilmember Delpez.
No.
Councilmember Barker.
Yes.
Councilmember Watson.
Yes.
Councilmember Colbert.
Yes.
Councilmember Severin.
Yes.
Amendment outlined in ordinance 2024-02 passes on a 4-to-1 vote. Okay, we move on to item number 7. This is a discussion or action to consider a legislative amendment to amend the private to public water culinary system connection. John, is this 2024-3? I don't see that here.
Yes.
Okay, I think that'll be done by Ryan Nunn. Thank you.
Council members, this text amendment, zoning text amendment, it came from Eric Casperson, our city engineer. He approached our planning department to amend the public works standards to add some standards to allow water connections between the public and the private, those private connections. The intent is to allow, in those circumstances, to really protect the water system, the city water system. But it would also give access for those the private side, the private connection side, allow them to have that access while also maintaining city access on their side. The kind of question, the reason this came about was, I believe there's been some development where this has been an issue, having that access for on the public side, and so this would really just alleviate those concerns, and it would provide some of that protection from our city connections, any kind of backflow or contamination that way. And so, you know, in our general plan, you know, this is kind of supportive. We do work to have public facilities and services and kind of look to anticipate needs like this where it would provide access on both parties really, and free them up to work on it when they need. But we have Eric here as well, but we can take any questions you guys have.
Had a chance to get the insight on this. It seems pretty simple. It protects the water system. Allows us actually to meter some things. Also, I guess the only question I have is I know that there's a lot of changes to our public works standards coming. We want to one-off these, or do we want to just address them all at once? You want to do this on one-off? This would be 2024-3. I don't know if you have any other questions for Ryan, but I think this makes sense from my perspective. Unless you want any belaboring this, if nobody has any questions. We have a motion.
Well, just a question, I guess. Is to staff, is there any disadvantage to delaying it if it is a part of the larger public works standards? Because it sounds like Scott had a raised hand back there.
We have an applicant who's pending the final plat approval based on their improvement drawing.
Okay.
So, well, just to be expedient for them and make it work.
Any other questions for Ryan? Well, I would seek a motion then on this to amend the private public water system connection standards as outlined by Ryan. This would be 24-3, correct? This will be a roll call vote, but I first seek a motion.
Mayor,
Councilmember Barker.
make a motion, we approve ordinance 2024-03, the legislative amendment to amend private to public water culinary system connection standards.
We have a motion by Councilmember Barker. We have a second to that motion. Second. So is there any further discussion on this issue? Right, start with you, Councilmember Delpez.
Yes.
Councilmember Barker.
Yes.
Councilmember Watson.
Yes.
Councilmember Colbert.
Yes.
Councilmember Severin.
Yes.
Motion passes on a 5-0 vote. Public water culinary system connection standards. We'll now move on to item number 8. This is regarding the resolution 01, right, John, -2024, is that correct?
Yep.
All right. We'll read the discussion regarding that resolution to update city council rules and procedures. Like to proceed, go ahead.
Okay, so council, this is revisiting the discussion that we had at our meeting 2 weeks ago. The changes that were suggested in this meeting have been included, including the change of the address, making it, you know, clear where we're meeting. And then there's a few just minor language changes as I read it through again. This example right here is something we didn't talk about in the past, but our current procedures, rules and procedures say that technically work meetings are only for stuff that's already been on the council agenda. And so this is amending it to say, hey, we can have stuff come up for the first time on a work meeting, which is the way that the city's done it since as long as I've been here. And so this is kind of a cleanup item. The next one is, we did talk about this one, emergency meetings. I don't know that there's any issues. This was just bringing it in line with state code. And then we eliminated 3 times where it said the mayor will strike the gavel, or will require him to. He can still strike the gavel, but there's no official requirement in any of the procedures anymore. We fixed again the address and saying that we just need people to say if they're a resident of North Ogden City as opposed to actually their address. This area related to electronic meetings was brought up in a conversation with one of you, I can't remember, but I went back through and retweaked this section to make it really clear how the city council is allowed to do electronic meetings and emergency meetings.
That excludes closed meetings, right, Sean?
Correct. Yeah, so it still says closed meetings, you can't participate electronically, but basically it now says that we don't have to officially announce the meeting as an electronic meeting and that a member will participate electronically. The assumption is that a Zoom meeting is the equivalent of holding a meeting in person. COVID kind of changed that for all of us. Although, as long as it's safe to do so, we will always use the council room as a anchor location, and residents can participate in person or via Zoom, and same as a council member. And then this is that section that got cut off in the last version, allows the mayor in case of an emergency or health or physical threat, can decide how to conduct the meeting to finish any important business in the way that follows the Open Meetings Act as closely as possible. Let's see. I think that's the end of the major changes. There's another strike the gavel elimination. This was a clarification. So here's the 5 minutes. Here's a clarification that the mayor can respond or ask for responses during public comments, or can defer to the end of the meeting. Or in sometimes we might have to respond later, but the idea is that there's not a required response at any particular time. This was another one that I felt like got cut off in the page shift. And so I added this, that things on the agenda will be taken in the appropriate order unless there's a motion to amend that order. And I think that was the intent of the original stuff. But just to make it clear, if the council shows up and finds the majority of the group is here for one particular agenda item, they can move that up so that individuals can participate in the item they want and leave. Or I guess, and technically you can move it back and require them to sit through all of your agenda items. But it just makes it clear that that's allowed. The adjournment, we've said it's non-debatable. So after someone makes a motion, then you're able to leave. I did add some clarification that it's after all the agenda items have been addressed. That would keep someone from just after agenda item 2 saying let's adjourn and leaving, before everyone was ready for it. So it does require technically the items to have been addressed in one fashion or another. And then this is tied to that same one, a fix that says we don't need a vote of the majority of the council members to adjourn. It's just that non-debatable motion. But the other items that are listed here would still be required for have a majority of the council members present to vote. And then the last change that you'd already talked about, I think, is this, that any North Ogden police officer shall be considered the sergeant at arms if called upon. And then kind of the last stuff we were talking about is the media policy. And we didn't include it in this section in the actual policies and procedures because there are some stuff that's already included in a personnel policy, and that's the stuff you've seen in the last staff report that kind of says this is how things are supposed to operate. But so there's some question about there's two components. One is, are there changes that the council would like to see to the social media policy and how the city interacts with residents that need to be written down and included in our media policy? And then the follow-up question is, are there things that this group would like to include in its policies and procedures about interactions with the media that this group would like to incorporate into your policies and procedures? And so we've got language in the staff report that we can pull in and include, but I'm not sure we've ever really dug into that. And I'm also not sure it's necessary, in the sense that we've had that other policy in our personnel policy that has operated for years. And between the mayor, myself, and Katie, who runs the social media, we've been running pretty good. Media requests have operated pretty good for the last 4 to 5, 6, 7 years, however long. I will tell you that the time when the media policy became the biggest frustration for the council is when the council was angry at each other. So not this group, obviously, you're all happy. But about 10, 11 years ago, there was a lot of brouhaha over the public works bond in that building that, was ultimately overturned in a vote. And so there was the council members were trying to regulate how they could talk to the media, specifically the idea being that I think it was focused on the idea that a council member is not a representative of the council. They're either a council member or they're nothing, meaning that if there's not 3 of you in a room, you're not a council. And so the idea was they were trying to make it so that people couldn't talk to the media without involving the entire group. Ultimately, that was struck down, and people said, no, you can speak. You just have to say, look, I'm on the council, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the city, and then provide your opinion. The exception to that is when you get an assignment from the mayor or myself as the PIO to respond to a media outlet, and then you are the official respondent for the city. So the question,
I would just say this: you can say all you want, but you're just a council member. But when you speak, majority of the public is going to say you're representing the city. So I'm going to say again, be very careful what you put on Facebook. Be very careful what you tell people, because you can do all you want, but you're not representing the city. That's not how you're going to be taken. And just throwing that out for consideration. John, I do believe also, as we discussed, that social media is not a platform to start debating and arguing issues. It's simply to put information out there, and if someone would like to come and talk about an issue, an ordinance, an issue in the city, I think it was Councilmember Pulver made a good recommendation of, council meetings are held Tuesday at 6 o'clock, second and fourth week of the month. You're welcome to come and express your concern, and if it's a legitimate thing, you can get 2 council members to put you on the agenda. You can pull that off. So I would just, once again, say that, social media is to give information only. It's not to express the opinions of the city, the council, or any individual staff member. So I don't know how you document that, but that's kind of, I think, an understanding I'd like us to all agree upon. Anybody has any? Councilmember Watson?
So I just had a question. Is it listed clearly in there that social media is included in media, where if a council member states their opinion that they need to say my stance is, or this is my opinion only, or is that just something that you're asking us to abide by?
Last I checked the free speech, I'm just issuing an advisement to help you be successful. To be successful in your service as a council member. I think we talked about, if it's an issue that's not just seeking information, like when it's cherry days, where can I pick up my football equipment? Then basically we have a response that says, here's where you can contact council, CCCM, email your concerns. So, yes, I think Councilmember Delp has his, kind of had his hand up.
Oh, that's not a problem.
If John's done with this presentation, I don't know, was he done?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think staff is recommending to not include the media in the council rules and procedures.
I was just gonna say about the media, I love just having you as the PIO because it limits like political grandstanding, like, oh, Councilman Dalpass would like to get in front of the media to get it, you know. I think it's really good that way because then it's just, here's the information and here's where the city stands.
Yeah, I agree. There has been some history in this city where that's been used for political purposes, and everybody's free to do that, but I would say call that real kosher. There has been times when John's not available when I've had to respond. But historically, the mayor has been the PIO, but I made it very clear to John that I had no interest in that as a political situation, so I asked John to take that on. I think he's done a relatively good job. Is he perfect? No, but he's getting close. So, okay, so I guess in that regard. Okay.
Just real quick, I just wanted to mention, because it was gone through very quickly, and I know a lot of residents asked about this last time. In this format of the rules and procedures, it allows 5 minutes of public comment at the beginning and at the end, so.
Correct. Go ahead, Councilmember Barker.
Just to show that I'm not so crazy. Pleasant View's City Council has beginning public comments for 3 minutes, not at the end. Harrisville has ending comments for 3 minutes, not at the beginning. Ogden allows comments at the beginning for 3 minutes. The commission ending for 3 minutes. Riverdale, the beginnings for 3 minutes. South Ogden's the beginning for 3 minutes. And Far West has the best ones. They're at the beginning, but it says the mayor gets to determine how long they are that night. Wow. But of all the cities I looked at in Beaver County, I could not find public comments at the beginning and the end, and everybody's time limit was 3 minutes.
Thanks for that information.
So, but we'll leave them at 5 minutes. I'm okay with that.
Well,
But I like the mayor having the opportunity to say, tonight we're just in 1 minute.
I'm not sure I like that. I think the difference is, and surely the council has rule on this, rule and reign. But I think it's important, and this is one of the things that I've been hopefully very clear on, is transparency and letting the citizens, express their concerns. I think we've had, to your point, Councilmember Barker, regards to no problems with snow plowing. We haven't had many problems with people going over 5 minutes. Occasionally I've had to call on those, but I appreciate your research on that. But I would say our difference is you want to be totally transparent and available to the citizens. So thank you for your research. Councilmember 7.
Mayor, I know this, I just want to make sure this is really, really clear, basically for the new council members. So, and I hope it's not redundant. I just want to make the point that when I was new on the city council, we had Mayor Taylor's death. I was fielding calls all day from different reporters, and I'll referring them back to John. 1700 North, the shooting up on Mountain Road, I had people calling me, so we just have to make sure that it's clear that if they make those requests, everything goes back to John. Just want to make sure that's completely clear.
Yeah, I think, a clear line of communication. Like I've asked every council member. They're still working on it, but not to give instructions to department heads. It's extremely confusing. The same thing as applies to residents. They could call several council members, get different. I'm not trying to cut off information. I'm just saying, understand what you're facing when you make the comments and try to be responsive to citizens. But just understand when you do the situation Because I've had numerous instances since I've been the mayor, where someone will say, oh, the mayor said this, right, John?
Mhm.
And then you call me and I'll say, what? I never said that, or conversely, I've had conversations where a council member said something because the citizens reported back to me. That's not what the city council member in their mind said, but the receipt of the information was in that way. So do what you want. That's just my advice from, I've been the mayor for 4 years and dealing with that, so, but no way do I want to cut off your service to the citizens of this community. Just want to make you understand kind of what you're facing. Okay. All right. Is there any further questions of Mr. Call on this item? All right. Let's see. This is resolution. What, John?
One.
This is resolution 1?
Yep.
So this is resolution 01-2024. This would be a motion to update the city council rules and procedures as presented by Mr. Call. We have a motion.
Mayor, I move that we approve resolution 01-2024 for updates on city council rules and procedures.
Thank you, Councilmember Severing. Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
Councilmember Watson seconded that motion. Thank you. Is there any further discussion or questions on this issue? If not, we'll take a roll call vote, starting with you, Councilmember Delpez.
Yes.
Councilmember Barker.
Yes.
Councilmember Watson.
Yes.
Councilmember Fulmer.
Yes.
Councilmember Severing.
Yes.
This motion passes on a 5-0 vote. Update the city council rules and procedures. We'll now move on to discussion and review of the salary policy of the city. This will be presented by Mr. John Call.
Thank you, Mayor. So, council, I know I answered several questions from several of you on this. The mayor, our current mayor, was on the salary committee almost 10, 11 years ago, where the council asked a group of residents to come in and evaluate city salaries and give some recommendations. At the end of that process, I think there was some frustration on the part of the committee members, the council, and the employees, because those recommendations were taken by the city manager at the time. And I don't want to say ignored, but heavily modified might be the right phrase.
Thrown in the garbage would be appropriate.
And I think since that time, the commitment, since that time, or anyways, has been to heavily involve the council in the process. So the way we do this, we look at our salaries, is we evaluate our salaries for individual positions compared to similar positions at other cities of our size. So we look at all cities that have a population between 10 and 25,000 people and say, how do we compare against those cities? And the reason we do that is, the best example I can give you is a city like West Valley is likely going to have to pay a police officer more to work there because it experiences or can experience a more frequent occurrence of traumatic situations. I'm not going to say that that we don't experience some dramatic stuff here, because our officers definitely do. But that is one of the reasons that I personally feel they make a little more in those cities, is that's how they attract officers to put up with a little bit more of the frequency of those type of events. But we do have some positions where we have compared ourselves to other cities larger than us, because we're trying to hire talent for those positions.
Within 75 miles, right, John?
Within 75 miles. Yep. But basically the goal is we want to look at cities our size and positions of who are employees that are doing the same thing as our employees are doing. The commitment is we look at it every 6 months. There's not a commitment that we will take action every 6 months. In fact, those employees who've been here since 2008, 2009, there was 4 or 5 years there where employees didn't get any raises ever. So during the crash of 2008, 2007. But since that time, the commitment that I have made is that we will talk about what's needed, where we're at, what the market is doing. And so we can stay on track and hopefully keep the folks who work here fairly compensated. In the packet, I gave you some information about the findings of this report. We typically we don't talk about individuals specifically because it's not fair to the individuals to have their names be brought up in council meeting. But we did identify that in this round, we do have some individuals that are, you could argue are underpaid. And the reason I say you could argue is it's an art. We typically will take our, I'm going to bring up my fancy little spreadsheet I made for this presentation. So what we typically will do is we will look at a position like a Parks Worker 1. We'll find out what the average pay is among all those cities. And then we say the minimum we will pay anyone to do that job is 90% of that average. And then we also put a maximum of 110% of that average. And that just gives us some bookends. They're usually 90% is that brand new first learning the job type thing. And then the 110% ends up being that critical job with the superstar employee. And so employees over a certain amount of time with experience can work their way up to obviously above 90. The current goal is to get people to 100, to get people to the average. And you can see that in our position for the employees that are the Parks Worker 1s, and we have more than one of them, but the actual average pay is more than the 90, but quite a bit less than the 110. And that's where it kind of falls into that art of they're in this range. Go ahead, Mayor.
Something there.
Yeah.
You taught me in our discussion the other day, is that average is supported by cities. They could have Park Workers 1 that have been there 4 years and have made it through a range. We may have people that have only been 2 years. So the average, that's why John calls it somewhat of an art, because we don't know exactly what's comprised of the average pay, if they're longer term, shorter term. So we just kind of have to assume that that's representative of what we've got. But we found in certain instances as we dug deeper that the reason some of those are up higher is because they have longer term.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. Here's what the report looks like that we look at. Let's see, it jumped down on me. I'm just trying to find the ones we're talking about. So here's a Parks Worker 1, and you can see there are roughly 20 cities. Well, maybe not 20, so 12 that are actively paying workers. That's what this column, I might step up here for you. That's what this column is showing. This is the actual pay of current employees, the actual average, the actual high, and the actual low. And what we do, or what the system does for us, is it takes those actuals and averages them. So that's where the $41,000 number that we talked about earlier comes from. And then we do the same thing. We go in and we input our information that gives the actual and the averages, and then it's included in this number. But you can also see there are 7 cities who have had people in this position in the past and either have stopped reporting or they no longer have that position. A good example is our neighbor to the east, Pleasant View. They don't have anyone in that position, and that might be because this is an entry-level position and all their employees might be the Parks Workers 2s or 3s. And that's probably a good explanation of why, but it does show that on 7 of 23, they looked at this and reconfirmed that they don't have anyone in that position. Sorry, that's kind of beside the point. But there is a lot of information and a lot to be sorted through. And I would be more than happy to sit down and talk with any of you more about this, but the real kind of crux of the discussion is that we have about 18 individuals who I say that the study is indicating that they are underpaid, meaning that the other individuals, roughly 60, 65, are adequately paid, or in some instances may be paid more than what their position may require. And so if we were to catch those 18 individuals up to where they should be, it would cost the city about $48,500 over the next 6 months. That includes salary and benefits. But as you can see in the parentheses, that same discussion, or that is not an expense that goes away. It's a continuing expense. And so in the future, it would also cost us $97,000 in next year's budget, assuming that everyone would maintain their position. We'd keep all those programs going. As I mentioned earlier, there's no expectation that we specifically go out and do this every 6 months, except that we look at it and we talk about it. To pay for this, as I've talked about it with Jamie, the sales tax is not as great as we wished it was. It's been a little rough. We're still over what we've collected, but we have a lot of expenses. So more than likely to fund this, we would most likely be dipping into fund balance, knowing that we are over the 15%, or technically over the 25%. And so there is money available, but this is kind of where we come and we talk to the council and say, what would you like us to do? How would you like us to look at it? We have the options in looking at this of doing a lower number, funding it as I've suggested, or we could not do anything at all. And it's up to the council, as the folks who hold the purse strings. If you are inclined to approve an increase for this group, then we would need to do a budget amendment because we don't have enough in the individual departments to cover it. If I remember right, about 60% of this would be coming out of general fund, and the other 40 would be coming out of enterprise funds. So
I think the question is, the council set a policy to fairly pay people. Is when you catch that up, because the market is always moving. So it's kind of a risk assessment type thing. And let me just add a little color to the 90 and 110% to know that we just didn't make that up. I've had the opportunity to serve on numerous compensation committees where studies have been done by experts and people have brought in, particularly in one of the committees I sit on, they are required to evidence that their employees are not overpaid or underpaid. I think, John, correct me if I'm wrong, about 60 odd people that are fairly compensated, about half of those are actually above the study.
Yep.
About half of them are about right on the study. So you have about a third that seem to be under, a third that are on, and a third that appear to be higher than our policy in that. But basically, as John mentioned, because this is an art, people look at that saying, you're fairly compensating if you're in that range because of the inaccuracy of information and the art of the system. So, you could say that somebody that's at the 95th percentile is underpaid, but they're really within the range and considered appropriately paid. And for those of you who've been attending or know on the council, I believe that people in the private sector expect to be fairly paid. And for people who think that people in public should be working for less than fair compensation, I have a total disagreement. I guess the question is when do we catch that up? Because for a number of years, the market's been moving very quickly. And we wanted to make sure that we reduce, risk of loss and make sure we're continuing. So the question is when do we catch the people up according to our policy. Doing that. To me, that's the question on the table. And I think one of the reasons, just so people understand, that we continue to look at this, particularly at mid-year, is because you as a council kind of need to know where the market's moving, because we have to budget for that adjustment as we prepare the budget until July 1st comes along. So we'll always be kind of trying to get you that information. So to me, that's the question on the table is, how do we do that? When do we do that? Because it is not in the budget. I think 2 or 3 years ago, we did budget for that, didn't we, John?
Yeah, we had 100,000 budgeted.
There. So anyway, Councilmember Pulver, John, did you have any information? I'm sorry.
Oh, just one other final thing to the mayor's point, with how quickly things are moving. We do have a spreadsheet that's been tracking every 6 months for the past 6 months, so 3.5 years, that help us see which jobs are moving the fastest. And a good example is that we have one position, and I'm not going to mention the name of it, but it has increased 38.9% in the past 3.5 years. And it's not a huge thing, but that's $10,000 of increase over that short time frame, which doesn't seem like a huge amount, but you start looking at across 30 different job positions, and it's anywhere from 38%, and we have had a few that really haven't moved much, down to 5%. As a movement. So anyways.
I would say one other thing that the experts do in this, if they see something that's really odd, and we've seen this here, like 1 year it went like this, and then the next year it dropped like that. So they kind of smooth that out and take the outliers out of the situation, because they found so many times that it was a blurb and then it came back, in line. So, it is an art. Getting to that number, but it's just not pulled out of the air. It's just not pulled out of, that range between 90 and 110. Those are things that most people have in their policy. So, Councilmember Pulver?
Yeah, just to add to that, having been working with engineers for longer than I want to say, the key thing is retention, because everybody looks at the number on the screen and says, oh, that's a lot of money. Well, it's a lot of money when someone leaves and they say, well, it's because you didn't pay me enough. And you can't really say, oh, we'll pay you now. But the key thing is that once you have to go find somebody, and they're going to ask for higher money anyway, and you have to retrain them, and you have to go find them, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that number that you see on the screen, that's nothing compared to what is actually retaining somebody involved in. And that's just not Pulver's opinion. That's literally what industry has dictated. So, and I think Vigo guys here could probably dictate that too. If you take care of the people that you have, you don't have to worry about trying to find somebody else. Just a thought, and I know that's something we have to find in the budget. We have to go figure out, because that's not something that. But I think it's 100%. You have to pay people fair, or they're just going to leave with the certifications that we provide them, with all the training we gave them. So.
And I would just add to that, retention is obviously your point of retaining versus hiring is true. But I'm going to add this too. I call it the 3 C's. I've been through a lot of employee surveys in my life. I've never had anyone come and say they're overpaid or fairly compensated. Seriously. I've never had anyone say that communication is really good. When you look at studies, those are always the lowest. So the problem you have, in addition to making sure we're fairly paid, because look, I used to deal with this with IT guys. They go out and find the highest salary somebody's being paid, and that was what everybody's being paid, right? But there's additional things on top of that that are important to retention. That's making sure that they have the right equipment to work with, that we have a culture of inclusion, that we're basically taking care of them in more ways than salary. And so I agree 100%. It costs you more to hire somebody than it does to retain them. But I'd also say fair is in the eye of the beholder. You know, what is fair pay is seriously in the eyes of the beholder. And so it's very difficult to meet all those demands, but as a council and as a city, we need to make sure we have a fair policy, that we're aware of what's going on in the market, and that we reduce the risk of departures, even though I don't think we can eliminate it. But so anyway, just my 2 cents worth. Councilmember Severing.
Mayor, I would say as we contemplate this about when to look at these kinds of adjustments, I think we've been incredibly conscientious of making sure over the years that the employees have been adequately compensated. As I've thought about this, whether it's a mid-year and beginning of the year, I think there's some prudence in just allowing the next 5 or 6 months to pass and to kind of look at the market and maybe make a decision once we've collected ideas from the department heads about budgets and where we're going to be at with sales tax. So I would probably recommend that we make a decision and make an action taken at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of the fiscal year.
Councilman Valpas.
I'd like to say that the council's done really well over the past few years, especially getting to where we are with employee pay. I'm proud of where we're at personally. I would say most people are. I want to point out, like, my mind goes to the worst case scenario. I hate that my mind works that way, but the worst case scenario for me is that sales tax tapers off or goes down from now on, which is very possible. And so I worry about making a big decision with where we are in the economy right now. So in my mind, I'm thinking for the 18 individuals, it was, I think, $97,000 annually. And last time we had a property tax increase, I think we estimated about $18,000 per 1% of tax increase. The number's probably slightly off, but it's right around there. And so, you know, $100,000 in annual increases at once, to me, is about 5-6% of a property tax increase. So even though John's presented, which I think is a completely legitimate option of taking it from fund balance, if property tax dips down, I would feel less good about doing that. And so my gut is that we have done so much work every 6 months to get it to where it's at, that I feel like we're finally very close to where we need to be. And I think it would be our commitment as a council, at least while I'm speaking for myself, that, you know, kind of start this rhythm of once yearly, but kind of like always once yearly. I would hate to go, you talked about in the past where there was years, it was 4 or 5 years without any increases. I mean, that's brutal. That's like so bad. And so I think we've reached where we need to be. I believe, and I think we assess it on a yearly basis. We've had residents mention, for better or for worse, and people can debate if they are right or not, but some residents have said, oh, why do we have so many budget amendments all the time? And I think it's difficult to avoid budget amendments for some of the essentials and things that comes up. But I also do think that it makes sense to try your best to just make your budget decisions on that annual budget.
Anyone else have a comment? Council member Watson.
I just had a question. So it sounds like John's saying this is something that happens every 6 months. It's on this program and it's going to continue every 6 months to look at it. So we knew that in times past that this would be looked at every 6 months, but there was not, am I correct that there was not any money set aside for this?
Yeah, because I think there's a connection between looking at and making the adjustment. We will continue to look at this every 6 months because I think we need to have that information for you when you budget. And, but you are correct. We've looked at it, we've made some major adjustments because of rapid movements in the market. Those rapid movements have settled back a little bit. They're not totally gone, but it's settled back somewhat, but not gone away. But that's your question.
Yes, I just had another question. I can
Go ahead.
again. So are there certain positions that there's more of a shortage or a demand, that the market is really competitive? Those might stand out, even if they aren't at the highest percentage off on the spreadsheet and the algorithm, but maybe somebody that we're worried more would be at risk necessarily than is the furthest off from the recommended pay. Would that, if there were this kind of situation where there was a standout couple that, you know, we really wanted to adjust to avoid the risk of losing them over the next 6 months, is there a different recommendation if we wanted to do something less than the 18?
Yeah, I went through that with John. We kind of did a risk assessment. And I would tell you that what we've tried to do, for instance, I don't think it's any secret that police officers are in demand. Everybody wants ours because we got the best police officers in the state. Right, Chief?
Absolutely.
So what we've done is their target might be the 110% of the average to cover that situation of risk. Versus where there's not such demand, they may be at the 100%. So we have made that adjustment to, but John and myself have gone through the list and looked at it in that way. I was somewhat surprised on some areas that we were in the market so closely, because I would have thought that they had moved more, but you know, you got to base it somewhat on data, right? I would just say that perhaps what we ought to be looking at, to your point and to others that have been made here, is sitting down with each department head and saying, okay, where's areas that we can fund this out of in the current budget? Knowing that we're making a commitment going forward, I'd like to maybe sit down with each, have John or somebody, John and George, and you know, but anyway, and see, you know, go through that risk analysis and see if there is a way within the budget parameters we have, with the understanding that if we make an adjustment now and they're caught up, that may be foregoing a July adjustment because they'd be caught up. The market's obviously not going to move that much because people don't enter in the data because a lot aren't making major adjustments. I mean, that's an option for you to consider, but it's surely your call. But I think it's important that our team members here, our associates, understand what the anticipation is, what commitment is, because I will tell you, I think ex-council member Swanson would agree here. Part of the substantial increases we had in property taxes, elevating people to that level of, I'm not being critical, but we found substantial underpayment. I mean, I think at one point, John, when we implemented this policy, just about everybody in the city was underpaid. And so we have made progress, but you know, once you think you've plateaued, you don't need further progress, then you start going this way. So anyway, any other questions, suggestions? Councilmember Barker?
When do cities input their data?
Majority of them, the data shows up in July, August, September.
So after they pass their budgets.
Yep.
So in theory, if we wait till July, we're a year behind.
No, because I think we have that information. That's what John's basing it off of right now.
Well, when do we input our data? After we pass our budget?
We do it after we do a raise.
So if they're doing it after they do a raise, this is last year's raises data. And by the time it comes to July, obviously we'll be getting more raises, and we'll still be a year behind.
I think I asked that question. And we don't know exactly, but we think that's been updated. Well, that's current information.
Well, so this will show you, it depends. So here's one, this is
Oh,
Farmington. They updated it this month, January of 24. South Ogden did theirs of July of 23. And so it will tell us when they've been into it. I mean, here's one that's July of 22. And so we do use that, especially as we're looking for outliers to see, is there anything being left off the table? But it's never perfect. And in fact, one of the jobs has moved a little bit from even when we pulled it 3 weeks ago. So there's always some updates going on.
I don't think we would make the assessment we're a year behind. Because you can see that those levels have been entered in after the budget was approved. Not everybody, but a good portion of them.
But so my thought, if I may, my thought is working next door, where we don't disclose what our raises are gonna be until after they're passed and adopted. And so when we're competing with a neighboring department, nobody tells anyone what they are getting for a raise until they're adopted. And then also other jurisdictions have a calendar year budget. So here until January, then they can adjust it to us, so we're kind of leapfrogging each other, and it's all just
All the squirrel cage.
Yep, it is.
Because everybody wants to retain their employees, so it's difficult.
I think in the short term, I like the July thing, but I think in the short term, I think there's something to be said with the Citizens Budget Committee, since we're kind of doing things a little bit different this year, to look at whether or not the department heads can squeeze that in to the current budget. I mean, if it's not feasible, because we're gonna talk to each department head, if it's something that's not feasible, then they need to yell. I think that's one of the big things, and if they've already said can't do it, then we are where we are. But if that's not the case, and there's some wiggle room, because I know there's always some, but that would be something to do. And I think I do agree that it could be behind, but I think at the same time, the current budget environment and all the stuff we got to go through, I think that's leak out. That's kind of the big thing. This is something that gets pushed to the next year. I think that we got to figure out how. That's the big thing.
So another question, if at this point we have 18 who you could argue are underpaid, then does that mean in 6 months, when it's July and we're doing it again, there could be another 18? Would that make a difference on our budgeting or our process that there's too many to address at one time? Is it easier to spread it out where it's not like every employee is getting a raise every 6 months. We're seeing who is falling below, and we're finding out just the few that are falling below. And so if we find some that are falling below now and some that are falling below, I realize that there's the 6 months discrepancy there that we would have to find a place for, but I just would hope that in July, when we do finalize the budget, that every employee, that no one's falling behind. So would it harm ourselves if we save that all of those amendments for the same moment?
John, too, I think it would be fair to say, 18 people are underpaid. Some of those are 30 cents. I mean, every dime counts, don't get me wrong, but I don't want you to think that we've got, some are a couple bucks, that I've seen, but some are like fairly minimal.
Yeah, I think when we first started this, to put it into an example, we had some people who were $10, $11, $12 low an hour. And we're to a point now where
Not on this one. I believe.
right, not on this one, but because of all the catch up the council's been doing the last several years, we do have some that are multiple dollars, but we sure have a lot that I don't want to, it goes back to that art, but if it's less than 20 cents, then they're probably where they should be. And so we have a lot of people in that maybe 20% high, 20% low range that are pretty spot on, which has been, it's really nice to see because like the mayor said, we used to have 55 to 60 that were low consistently. And we're getting that number better.
So what do you want to do, council? John's just looking, I think the question is, do we appropriate and make a budget amendment to make mid-year adjustments on those that John has identified? I think that number actually has been adjusted, John, since it went out. It's somewhat less than that.
Which number's less than what he said?
Is that the adjusted number, John, after we've gone through and looked at
the number that we originally came at, I mean, we were at 68,000, and then we've kind of scooted it down a little bit down to the 48,500 and that was just looking at what if we cap it? What if we don't let someone have a 12% raise at this point, but we cap it at a 5 or a 6 and so that was scaling it back some to the 48,000.
So I think that's the question that John needs advice on. I think, our policy is fair and adequate, unless you want to adjust it, is how we apply the policy.
I just recommend we assess it for the budget this year and address it in July, June, July.
I agree. That's what I suggested at the beginning.
Yeah, and ask the department heads as well at the same time, whether that's something they can absorb or not.
Councilmember Barker?
I'd recommend just paying, they're doing the 48.5.
Councilmember Watson?
I just worry that if we decide to say no now, does that leave us in a place where there's a chance that we'll say no next time? Because if that's the case, then I'll say yes now. I just want everyone to be fairly compensated, and if it's going to be addressed in our budget amendment or our budget process over the next few months and incorporated into our next fiscal year, then I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I hope I could answer your question. It'd be very difficult for the council to say we're not going to pay our people fairly. It's just assessments made. So I would hope that, never's never, right? As John said, and I know there's people in the private sector that have gone even 2 or 3 years without increases. I don't think that's our policy. So I think I can answer your question pretty much in the affirmative with some degree of confidence that, no, we're not going to say no come July 1st at all.
I guess, sorry, last thing. The reason I say it like that is because if it's the 97,000 that we're worried about, then, well, that shouldn't be what we're worried about, because that's gonna come anyway in our next fiscal year. And so if it's the amount that we're worried about to get us until July, that's a different question. But if it's a matter of what are we going to do next fiscal year, then my vote would be to be sure that everyone's fairly paid. So.
I think that's our goal, is with the data we have. I would just point out, I think 3 of the council members have stated their position, so but I still would like to be able to sit down with each department head and do their assessment and see if there's a way we can accommodate that. There's surely an upside to doing it, but there's a downside too. Because if you make adjustments for 15 people, there's no secrets, right? Everyone's the same, and mine is not as important as those who got it. So you have to be very open in your communication and help them understand where they're at and why they're there. And I see that, just granting, if I'm reading this right, just granting 48,000 right now is not the approach of the council. The approach is to maybe kind of look more into it with a scalpel and see what we can do to accommodate. So would the council be okay with granting that visibility? Because, you know, I've asked each council member what their priorities are, right? So we can focus our budgeting on that. Just about everyone that came back said they'd like to do all these things with no property tax increase. So we're gonna have to find the money somewhere. So, because we're gonna compensate our people fairly, it's just when and how we do that. Okay. All right. John, does that give you adequate thing? I'd like to very quickly schedule appointments with each department head.
Okay.
See what we can do.
Yeah.
Okay. Item number 9. I believe item number 10, John, you've asked to be postponed to a future meeting.
Yeah, we didn't get the final agreement in time.
So we need a motion to postpone that since it's on the agenda.
That'd be the cleanest way, yeah.
This way, we have a motion.
Mayor, I move that we postpone item number 10, the capital project 2550 pond watershed agreement.
Second that motion. Any discussion on that? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, item number 10 is it's postponed. We'll now go to item number 11, which is council department reports. So to put some perspective, I am going to request we have a closed meeting this evening. So if you would limit your reports to pertinent information that's important to the council and the public, I would appreciate it. Let's start with you, Councilmember Pulver.
Short and sweet, a lot of snow, did a ride along with the snowplow driver, I don't know if people saw that. But anyways, it, very eye-opening. So don't throw snow into the street, plow your sidewalks and move your cars. That's basically it for right now. How's that? Short and sweet?
That is. Well, I don't want to, if you got more to say, feel free. Councilmember Watson, do you have
Well,
anything you'd like to report
I
on
have
that?
the most amount of people under me. I just want to say that we're working with that I'm liaison for, so I've called a lot of people. So I might be a little bit longer than Chris. So I talked to Justin. They had, I'm sure you all heard, a Special Olympics event this weekend and had great success for that.
There was a lot of people.
More attended, more plunged than last year, and that went really well. There was a lot of clearing of snow to make that happen. He also said they are looking for lifeguards, and that's always something that they need help. Just if you know of anyone who is 15 or older who wants to be a lifeguard, they're always looking. Their class to certify is in the middle of March, so they need to register, or sorry, the middle of February, so they need to register by the middle of February. So get on that if you can. They only do a second class in May if they need it. So they're hoping that they can get all the lifeguards to that class in February. And then Ryan, our city recorder, right now is handwriting our minutes and also summarizing them, which is a big job and it's a time commitment on her plate, but she's looking forward to the AI software that's coming soon that will really help her. Katie's doing great. Morgan is doing great with events. She did have a request, and maybe this is something that we discuss further at another time, but she was hoping that in our future events for this upcoming year, she would love to see every council member have buy-in to one event each, so that it's not just that you show up in secret and no one really knows, but that you show up and you be seen and you represent the city and you have some kind of buy-in to like maybe a job or a service involved in that. So she was saying that other cities will have one council member at each event, that they, you know, flip pancakes or whatever to show their commitment to that event. And I am the liaison, so I'm happy to go and to participate myself, but she said in other cities they have a liaison in addition to that. So just a thought there. And then, let's see, I think I got it really. So, I talked to Bryce, he's doing well, and Becca is doing well. So that's everybody.
Anything else, Councilmember Watson?
It wasn't listed on my report, but I will just say that the youth council got to go to Day at the Capitol, and that was really successful and great.
Yes, thanks for doing that. I think we had a good turnout. Good to have them there. So I'd like to thank Councilmember Delpaz, who went down. I know Councilmember Pope, you were counting on it, tried, but got in the midst of the storm. Let me just say this in time. I'm gonna try to encapsulate this. I sat down with Jamie, and you heard the term analytical review by the auditor. So we sat down and I went through the statements in detail with Jamie, looking at anything that was halfway through the year. So if revenue was less than 45% or more than 55%, I asked questions, and I would say I felt very comfortable with our discussion that a lot of the variances were timing. For instance, if you look at our debt service, we've made the principal and interest payment already, but we won't be making another principal payment during the year. So that shows that. You look at such things as our revenues from inspections, for instance, and building permits, etc. Well, I think we're all aware that we have lower volumes there. Conversely, though, you have building permits pulled down a prominence point for 2 apartment buildings early on in the year. It kind of jacks your revenue up, but we figure those things will smooth out over time. One thing that if anybody is board wants to look at those things, you'll see the variances in miscellaneous income. Our interest income continues to be very vibrant. The funds we have and the interest rates that are out there. I would say that we had a discussion about the aquatic center, and you've heard a lot of that from me, is that the city will not be able to continually fund that deficit as RDA funds dissipate, because that would be coming out of the general fund. And you want to talk about, Chris, I'm going to test your math here. To fund $175,000 a year out of the general fund, what kind of property tax increase would that take?
Is that 30%?
7%. 7%. Just to have
But
it
close. Last year they had 84 come out of RDA, so it wasn't 175.
If you look at the budget this year, it's budgeted $175,000. We hope that's not the case, but depending on whether. But I would tell you the city cannot afford to continue to fund the $84,000 deficit because costs continue to go up, and I think that's in the process, and we've had a discussion about that. So just to kind of, in the spirit of time, I felt very comfortable about our discussion when we went through, and I appreciated Jamie spending the time. We do not have the sales tax report at this point in time to see how sales tax came in for the month of, let's see, that'd be November. So we can't see what the trend is there in regards to Councilmember Delpaz's concern, but that should be coming shortly. So I won't bore you with the rest, but I think we had a good discussion. Okay. Mr. Call, did you have additional things you want to talk about capital projects, please?
Yeah, really quick. So the 2550 detention basin, is ending, it is finalizing the environmental analysis stage. Signatures should be going to the NRCS for signing, sorry, the documents. That's what the watershed agreement was. They need that signed from us before they can sign. But that'll start the design phase, which is estimated to be 6 months, but we're gonna meet with them on the 5th to make it shorter. And then the construction phase should start after that. Pickleball courts, they are excited to come and get that going. We have 10 inches of snow in the way. So we're coordinating with them on the appropriate time so that we don't end up with compaction issues under the pad. Loman View Playground is part of that. We've got some designs. The parks team is looking at those, and we're going to pick a vendor and get that going and installed before July as well. North Ogden Plaza, our consultant is finishing up their analysis for the Southtown area. And we should get a final document that's ready to present here soon. We had over 100 comments. Is that right, Scott? 700 comments. Sorry. Usually we get like 45. So we had a lot of participation. Public safety building, we should be in that soon, very soon. The electricians are getting all the outlets in, and we're doing our walkthrough tomorrow, our kind of punch list. I don't know that it'll be ready for the work session in 2 weeks, but we should be holding council meeting in February in that building.
You're gonna be over there every day, just saying, come on, guys, let's do this.
Well, we've had a lot of people step up, in addition to Nate and Bryce taking and leading their stuff. Ken and others, as I mentioned last time, have really stepped up to get things in and going. The water reservoir is being leak tested now, meaning they're filling it and seeing if any leaks come, and then they'll fill it further and see. That's an exciting thing to finally be done. It'll make our fire protection and other systems much more robust. And then the waterworks park over by the old public works, we've got a design for the water portion, the design for the concrete portion, and now we're just going to start looking at installation and stuff on that one. Our employees are doing a lot of the work on that as kind of a team building. And as we find out, hopefully a cost savings. We had an estimate on just the installation for the water portion, and it was obscene is probably the right way to say it. And so we'll be cementing those in ourselves, but we won't be doing the flat work ourselves. So anyways, that's the capital projects.
Thank you, John, and I hope we don't delay this watershed agreement too long, because we have an awesome potential development here on the south side of 2700 Little Washington Boulevard that's basically being delayed with this basin.
And the agreement will be ready by next meeting. The Pine View's meeting isn't until February anyway, so it was going to be delayed, but I told them we'd get it done as soon as possible, and then just waiting for
This was a project that was approved over 5 years ago, I think. So, and this development is going to lighten some of the burden on property taxes for our citizens. So,
yeah.
I hope we can do that. Anything else, John?
Nope.
Okay, thank you for that report, council members and John. Now go to item number 12 on our agenda, which is public comments. Once again, just remind you, if you would limit your comments to no greater than 5 minutes. And if you would state it here, do some going on.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Doug Anderson, resident of North Ogden. I'd like to give you some feedback with regard to Councilmember Barker's research into how many minutes other cities allow. Right on. Thank you. That just goes to show how North Ogden is better than anybody else in terms of transparency. You listen to us, we listen to you, we cooperate, we communicate. Good job. That's a thumbs up. Regarding the allowing businesses, employees to park, on the street, I would give that a thumbs up also. although I was a bit disappointed in the wording, and maybe you might want to consider a little tweak to the wording. That it just says employees. Well, I'm an employee. Does that mean I can come over and park on your business? You know, it says employees. Maybe it would have been a little more clear to say employees of a given business may be allowed to park within 200 feet of that business. And just a little more clear. I'm sure that was the intent, but a little loosely worded there. And also it says, if I recall right, it said during business hours. Well, people don't just park and instantly show up for business. So maybe allow a little window on both sides of business hours, say during business hours and within 30 minutes of business hours, both plus and minus. So people have a chance to come and get, you know, changed, wash their hands, turn on their computer, whatever it is. So maybe allow the plus and minus extra on top of the business hours would be wise. Just a technicality, but you know, a little more clear. On the let's see, how am I doing for time? Few minutes left. On the building ordinance, allowing change the height and the angle and all that. That's, I love geometry. I get it. I'm a bit disappointed because, and Mr. Hess, Scott, you correct me if I'm wrong. I think you said the net effect of this is it's going to allow taller buildings to be built closer to the property lines in the long run. And I personally, as a resident of North Ogden, I kind of like open spaces. I grew up in Los Angeles, and it's a nice place to be from. I'll tell you that. As a citizen, I really don't relish the idea of taller buildings encroaching on the beautiful sky and mountains that we have here. That's one of the nice things about living in North Ogden is we can see we're not surrounded by taller and taller and closer buildings. So I would have not been in favor of that. And nothing personal against Mr. Wallace. You know, it's just a general principle thing. Speaking of principles, it kind of rubs me the wrong way to think that somebody will knowingly violate an ordinance and then come and get permission to have done that. That's just, there's something wrong in principle with that. And so I didn't like that. And if the building height has to be reduced a couple of feet, I think I understand if the trusses are already in place, et cetera, that's going to involve some cost, but decisions have consequences, you know, and they should. And it kind of rubs me the wrong way to think that we've just said, well, okay, you know. So I would give you the thumbs down on that decision there. I guess that's it. Again, thank you for listening, and have a wonderful evening. Half a minute left.
Steph Casey, North Ogden resident. I might babble a little. I'm not really sure how I feel about tonight. It was weird. One thing I really believe in is that laws and ordinances should be equally applied among all residents. I don't think if I started building anything in my backyard without a building permit to such extent that when I got caught, I could just come in here and be like, oh, let's change the ordinance and hey, that's good. I mean, right now I'm feeling like, oh, I can just do whatever I want because well, why do we have ordinances and rules? I mean, I listened to Planning Commission for over a year work through accessory dwelling units and what that would be, what those would be. They worked hard on it and it was just, it was weird. Oh, Brenda Ashton wants to comment and she could raise her hand.
Oh, it just raised. No,
Maybe after Sandy.
Wait, wait. Sandy Cochran, North Ogden resident. I have to agree with Steph. It was a really weird night. This thing, I can't believe how you voted. The applicant actually admitted that he knew he should get a permit and he didn't. So he kind of just flipped the bird to your ordinance and you all seem okay with that. And he also said he could have built it somewhere else and avoided all of this. Well, if he'd gone to get the permit, he would have known that. And I appreciate JD saying, maybe we haven't given this enough thought. Maybe something's going to come up that we didn't consider. Maybe there are people sitting at home now who wanted to have a building closer to the property line, but they followed the rules and they didn't do that. And he gets to do whatever he wants. No fine. There are fines. Am I correct? The city does fine people for not doing the right thing. No fine whatsoever. But he came up here with an attitude. And he got exactly what he wanted. So thank you, JD.
Let's wait till we get Brenda here.
okay, she should be able to talk.
I am unmuted. Thank you. I appreciate that. For some reason, your raised hand thing isn't working tonight. First of all, Mr. Barker and I talked about the limited comments. I understand where he's coming from, but I appreciate you not changing the time on the comments. Quite often you guys will say things like, we want more public to be included. We want you to come. If you're going to limit our comments, what's the point in our coming? I know I've complained to you before about answering the emails, so I feel like this is my only recourse. My other comment is, I have a question. If I build a building without a permit, am I going to get fined? No answers tonight?
Oh, hold on, I'm gonna ask Mr. Call that, he'd be the expert in that regard.
So we have fined individuals in the past who refuse to comply, but usually our goal is compliance with the process, which is, and so it has been far and few between that we've actually done a fine for.
Oh, you know, that's so frustrating as a resident. If that's the case, why do you have ordinances? You change them when someone comes in and wants a change. He again stated tonight that he knew he should have a permit and did not and built anyway. He could not get a variance, and then tonight you guys changed the ordinance for him. It's very frustrating for other people in the city who want to do things and follow the ordinance. At the very least, he should get a fairly good fine for not getting a permit and not following. Thank you.
Is there anyone else online that would like to comment?
No other raised hands.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to comment? Please state your names, if you're residents, and please limit your comments to 5 minutes.
My name is Jason Westbrook. I'm a resident of North Ogden plus business owner. I own Big O Tires here in Sewell. Not a resident of North Ogden. I live in Ogden, but we're Big O Tires. So,
when are you moving out here?
maybe eventually. I just want to say thank you for your time and consideration on the winter parking. I did want to say that, you know, we do take consideration of everything that's going on out there. We are trying to make sure that everything's safe out there. Councilmember Watson, you had asked earlier about the parking from the stop sign. Just so you know, on the south side is where the stop sign is at. And from our driveway to that stop sign, nothing gets parked there. And that's about 100 feet roughly. As far as the police department and public works, we want to know that we respect the safety. We want to make sure that everything is safe out there. We're not gonna try and impede anything on snow removal. We're gonna be considerate of that. One thing that we would like to discuss about for maybe a further council meeting is possibly changing code of parking. Right now, the code is 20 feet back from the property line from Washington. When we originally proposed our parking in 98, we were told we couldn't add the extra parking stalls up front because it was only 7.8 feet away from the property line. You have just updated, I don't know exactly when this is, Scott provided this to me, to where it's gonna be 14 feet from the inside of the curb to the first parking, if it's not on Washington, or if it's not in a public area, I guess you would consider. I'm just wondering if there's any way that we can maybe consider for businesses to, or, I mean, as far as that house is going down Washington, they have a driveway out there. They're parking closer than 20 feet to Washington. So we're trying to decide if there's any way that we can actually get additional parking stalls. If we can move that, we can get probably another 10 to 15 parking stalls if there's something that we can do as far as that code. But that's something that I would like to propose and maybe look at for a future city council meeting. I just don't know what I need to do on that to pursue that.
I go through the same process you just went through.
Okay. All right. Once again, just thanks for your consideration and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment this evening? All right, we will end public comments then. John, if there's no one online. Yeah, I guess that thumbs up means. So we'll move to item 13. Is there any other additional comments from staff here tonight?
Just one quick one. The state legislature is looking really hard at stepping into local zoning rules. So if you're not watching the LPCs or getting involved, it'd be good to get educated. The current proposal is basically 8 units to the acre everywhere. So just keep that on your radar as something that you want to be involved in as it gets closer to a vote.
I have spoken with each one of our representatives, well, plus one, but I think I know where he stands, and they are not in favor of the state's taking zoning, but I do feel they may be in the minority. So, feel free to contact your legislatures. That's how I feel. Not just council members, but the public. So, okay. Los Angeles. Okay, any other comments? Councilmember Watson, go ahead.
I'm sorry that I'm making this meeting even longer, but I just wanted to comment that my thought process on this ordinance that we passed, and maybe I'm still learning here, but maybe there is a time, I'm not aware if there's a time for us to really explain why we vote the way we do. And maybe it's not even appropriate that I bring it up now, but just wanted to say my opinion that I had the affordable care, the affordable housing on my mind when I voted yes, because if there was more of an opportunity to have a starter home above a garage in the future because of this ordinance change, then I would be a fan of that. And so that was my reasoning. But I'm grateful for everyone's comments tonight.
Just to point out, there is another ordinance, I believe, for accessory dwelling units. Is that Chris?
Yes.
And trying to keep in mind that. So thank you for your comments. So Councilman.
So just to address Christina's question, because everyone's learning, that she's learning. She has the opportunity after a vote has taken place to raise her hand say, Mayor, I want to explain my vote. And he will address her and say, go ahead. And you say, here is why I voted the way that I voted. I just want everyone to know. So if you want to do that in the future, you are allowed.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty open here. We want people to be able to express that. Comments. So I think we have Councilmember Seven.
Well, I was just gonna follow up on what John was indicating about the LPC. You asked me to follow up, so I've been watching diligently. There are 16 bills that could affect North Alga in one form or another. John mentioned House Bill 306. That's the one that talks about the 8. So how do you want me to update the council on what's happening at the Hill? Just in public statements like this?
I think when you give your report on planning.
Okay.
But that would be nice to be inclusive.
Okay.
We do have 3 votes. Comprised of myself, you, and John.
Scott.
So we have 3 votes, but basically, as I kind of listen in, those who are there, they take their vote, say, oh, anybody else. So, okay, but there is a movement, and we talked about that numerous times. That, state is trying to take over zoning. Any other comments? Councilmember Fulber?
Yeah, so I guess the big thing, people saying it was a weird meeting, I don't disagree, but at the same time, one of the reasons I started this whole journey to become on city council was because of this weird wall that got constructed without any type of, it was a permit, but it was overbuilt. So I guess the point is that when something happens, not intentionally, like you said, it wasn't intentional. You thought he was doing it the right way, he didn't get a building permit. But my point is that ordinances are made to be changed. There's a whole bunch of things that were not perfect. I know for a fact that the building, the wall retaining wall height was what it's currently for. It's aesthetics. Yeah, you can engineer a ginormous retaining wall. Right now it's 11.2, I think. Anyway, same thing here. It's intent. What's the intent? Is to have a building that doesn't ginormous next to your fence line. If you look at some other cities along the, just going out to Pine City, they're not just 10 feet or whatever, they're right up above, against the property line. So, to me, one of the biggest things is what we want for the city. The intent of the ordinance was still there. That's why I voted.
Anything else? Council, this time I would like a motion to move into a closed meeting. Discuss items allowed by state code, and would ask a motion be made to that extent.
I move that we move into a closed meeting that's allowed by state code, but also that we have a 5-minute recess in between.
Okay. We have a second to that.
Second that.
A second. All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
All right, we will excuse the public. We'll take a 5-minute break. And